What's up, everyone, and welcome back to another episode. This week we're talking about 2D hollowing, large object support, and how to do both. I mean, we've gone over large objects before, but I've never done 2D hollowing with you guys. So this is new in that front, and 2D hollowing works similarly enough to 3D hollowing, which the major difference is being that there's infill automatically created for you, and you cannot export the model outside of Lychee using that infill and the holes you create. It does not seem to actually export it properly. Now, I don't know if that's something they plan on for the future, but the few times I have tried to do it that way and export the model with infill, doesn't work. I don't know why. It just doesn't seem to work. So in this instance, it works pretty well if you like working with Lychee's native system. So again, you're going to go to your Prepare tab and do everything the way you normally do. And then you're going to hop over to Hollowing, and you're going to hop over to that Hollowing 2D tab, and you're going to turn it on. The thickness is, of course, just like you would with Hollowing, and you can adjust that. You can also turn on something called dimming, which affects how the supports are created. And that can be adjusted as well. And you can kind of scroll up and down there with your slider to see how the dimming or whatever affects the actual support type, or it supports itself. Obviously, if you turn the 2D hollowing off and you have the dimming turned on, it's going to do some weird things. So don't advise that. But you can turn the dimming off safely. That's not really a necessary feature. And then you're going to want to mess with some of the other features down below, where you can see you have density, you have dimming again, and then you have pattern, and you have your type. Now, for your density, you can increase the density on these, on your infill as much as you like. The more the percentage goes up, the more supports get created as your lattice. Now, obviously, don't create so many that there's no point to hollowing your object at all. It's just going to be full of supports. Usually, I err on the side of about 20%. Sometimes I can go as low as 15%. If you increase the pattern size, which will increase the individual bars themselves, you can actually decrease the density, but you kind of have to balance that and see exactly which way you want to go with it. It's not an exact science per se, but each object has different insides the way they're shaped, so kind of use your judgment based on the inside of an object. This is a big, chunky, squarish kind of block, so it has a lot of room for this lattice to move and grow. And I think this will be a good way of supporting most of the internal structures inside of the physical object. Now, one of the interesting things about using the 2D hollowing system is that you don't actually have to go in later and then add any internal supports at all. In fact, you can't look at the interior the way you would using the 3D hollowing system. It doesn't actually let you do that. The only way you can actually see what's happening on the inside is by using the layer slider and actually being able to slide up and down and look at the way that the layers are being created, and that will show you the hollow slice, and you'll see obviously the hollowing bit is the part that's going to be in black. Now, of course, just like any hollow object, you're going to want to add holes, and the holes need to be placed in the appropriate places with the appropriate penetration. Now, we chose a thickness of 1.6 millimeters for our actual wall depth or thickness depth of the object. But you'll notice when I start placing these holes that they do not and will not penetrate all the way through, even though they are set at 2 millimeter penetration. Now, this is an interesting thing, and I've noticed this when I work with stuff using 2D hollowing. The thickness you choose is not necessarily what's actually being displayed on the layer slider or the slice itself, which can translate to the layers, or the thickness of the wall being a bit thicker than you think it's going to be. Now, I don't know if this is a fault of the particular meshes that I've worked with, or the geometries, where the polygons are actually a little thicker in that area, but it doesn't actually look like it is, and the program just can't really sort that out, and so it does it to the best of its abilities, and unfortunately you wind up with about a millimeter's worth of difference. Now, don't get me wrong, a 2.5 millimeter thick wall, not that big of a deal, but is it bigger than a 1.6 millimeter? Absolutely. And you can see where some of the walls are a little bit thinner in spots, and in other areas they're not. So it is almost related to mesh size and things like that, I think, in some instances. But I haven't really honed in on exactly what that is that's causing this issue in particular, and why I will eventually have to go back and make all of these holes a little deeper in order to actually have them penetrate the model and not leave me with massive suction and peel forces as this giant terrain part tries to print. As we work our way back around and we continue to make the holes, this is where we start to notice that most or all of the holes don't actually penetrate deep enough. So I'm going to go back through and I'm going to make sure that they do, increasing the penetration a little bit at each time, just to see how far they actually need to go in order to penetrate. And you can see I've made those 2.5, and I still don't think those are actually deep enough, so I'm going to go ahead and make them a little deeper, and we'll see if that makes a big enough difference. And of course, we'll go back over with the layer slider and we'll kind of just see where these are. I think eventually I will just, probably just make these penetrate about 4 millimeters deep, because I don't want to fight with them all day long. Just to try to get them at a good penetrative depth and make sure that they just fire through where they need to fire through. The last thing you want is a hole not actually being placed, and then you wind up with just a suction cup. And the whole time it's just going to print with that huge suction cup, and that's going to do just so much unnecessary things. It's going to stress out your FEP. It's going to put undue stress on all the parts. Your build plate's going to have to work harder. Your elevator's going to have to pull harder. Everything is just going to, let's try to avoid that. And we can see that at 2.5 millimeters, the holes on the bottom do seem to fire through. So that actually seems okay. These holes over here seem to fire through. We're getting good penetration there. Everything now seems to be firing through the model in its appropriate place. So once you are good and you have your holes where they need to be, and you're pretty sure that they're actually firing through the model and penetrating where they need to be, you can go ahead and move on to your support work. Now, some people might say, well, you could add like a giant, drain hole in the middle or one on the other side. And while you could, it kind of defeats the purpose of some of the infill, because if you have these giant drain holes, the infill will not, it won't work right. The little drain holes on the bottom, the infill can adjust for, and it's not going to affect it. But big ones, I think it has a hard time calculating, and you wind up with either supports missing or just firing into nothing. So that's something to think about. You have to be careful about the placement there and make sure that you're not making them either too dense, or make sure you're not making the infill too dense as well. You want to make sure you have enough room in between where those little infill grids are going to be, that there could possibly exist a hole in between that, because the program has to compensate for the space of the hole and the space of where the support is going to be. And it won't let you directly place the support there. But trust me, I've seen many times where using either auto supporting or some other feature will actually put a support directly through a hole, and that's not something you want ever. It's definitely going to be a problem. All right, so now we're ready to start placing supports, and you want to go ahead and place supports on the bottom of this kind of like you would a base. You want to take a nice, decent medium-sized support. In this case, I'm working with my larger medium size, and you want to place a decent row of supports at the very bottom where it's going to form first. And go in and fill any gaps. I mean, it doesn't have to be super tight. Well, you want to have some of the low bits there that are going to be making contact first be a little bit tighter than some of the other areas. Now, again, it's hollow, so you can go a little bit more lenient on some of the support structure. But for the most part, if you want to ensure good shape, you need to make sure that your supports are riding along the lines of contour. So what that means is, essentially, if you're doing a base, you want to make sure you make a circle. If it's a square base, you want to make a square. If we're working with a weird shape like this, you want to try and outline the edge of it as best as possible. You can use inline supporting to do this. You can use your support painter to do this. There's lots of options to get it done, and you can adjust it, the interval and the the density of those tools in order to give you a better or faster method of just doing the way you do your particular style of supporting. And if you follow some of my workflows, you'll notice that working like this, you're going to work a whole lot faster, as opposed to just literally just going one by one and placing every little tiny tip and, in where it has to be and moving each one and da-da-da-da. I don't even bother with that. I work with the particular size tips I do. I work in the densities I work in, and my supports literally, all I have to do is squeeze, and for the most part, my objects just pop right off. On occasion when there's like challenging or very delicate objects, obviously we have to be a little bit more careful there and ensure that we don't put too much density on little tiny frail objects. But that's just something we have to be careful for. And of course, those are the ones you would remove with your clippers, and just be incredibly cautious when you're doing the removal process on the supports, because those are the ones where you could potentially have a breakage. Whereas majority of the stuff that we do are very large objects. You're talking about thicker pieces of material in most cases, a lot less chance of these things having any kind of breakage during support removal, unless of course it's just a fine detail that that you might have an issue with. So in that instance, it's just important to kind of keep the boundary there where you want to balance the difference between the different types of supports. Now, when you're talking about doing something big and bulky like terrain, or just something big in general, even if it's a big piece of another component, the way you support these is really just going to depend on how you prepare them. If you're hollowing and you're using like traditional 3D hollowing, not the 2D hollowing method, you're going to probably have a little bit better time because you have a bit more control. The 2D hollowing aspect is really controlled by the software, and I feel like it works differently on different printers, and therefore you kind of have like this mixed bag result on how this is actually going to print on your printer. Now, I've used the 2D hollowing method a few times, and I've used some of the different methods. I've used the Chaitu box and I've used Lychee to do it, and I honestly prefer the 3D hollowing method in general. I don't really love doing the 2D hollowing method. I don't like the infill. I feel like it's far too dense. It creates a lot of interior supporting. I just don't. I don't think it's the best way to do it. Now, if you want to use it because you like the fact that it does the infill for you and it does a lot of that internal supporting and you don't have to worry about it, that's understandable. It has its limitations. If you were to do hollowing on a particular model and you were to say, let's say, give that to someone who did not have access to Lychee, they would not be able to use the 2D hollowed model if you exported it as an STL, even if you were to prepare it. When I've tried to do this, the hollowing doesn't translate, and the mesh and the object just look like a mess. I'm not really sure what happens to it. It just does not export properly. Now, mind you, I haven't tried to do this in more recent versions of Lychee, so they may have updated this feature perhaps in newer iterations of the software. That might be the case. If it is, maybe I will retract that statement because maybe it does work now. Please correct me if I am wrong in that one, guys, if you do know that in the comments. Otherwise, I still go with the 3D hollowing method mostly, because I can take the model, I can hollow it, I can punch the holes, and then I can export the model and physically have an exported 3D model that is hollow, that already has its drain holes where I need them to be. I don't need to worry about placing them anymore. I don't need to worry about adjusting it. I already have it ready to go. Each time I'm ready to go back and take a look at that particular piece, it's already ready for me to look at. So for me, that's a better way to do it, because I keep libraries of these particular assets hollowed and such like that with the models in case someone says, hey, I want this bigger. I can just take that particular piece hollowed and I can just make it larger by scaling it up. I don't have to worry about now, going back and taking the model, going back to Lychee, looking, okay, I did the hollowing in Lychee, now I have to take all the supports off, or I can, roll the dice and do a recalculate on it, I guess, if I want to. But This is, in my opinion, it's a bit of a bit better way to work workflow wise when you just have the 3D hollowed model versus the 2D hollowed model. But again, this is an option you can use in Lychee. Chai2 Box has a similar feature where I don't think they call it 2D hollowing. I could be wrong. I don't use that software too much, but I remember back when I did use it, there was sort of a 2D kind of cross-sectional hollowing system that did allow you to do like an infill thing. Voxel Dance's Tango or Tango 3D, I think, does it as well. There's a way to do it there. I believe even Mesh Mixer will let you do some sort of an infill function like this too. So it's not a unique function to Lychee Slicer at all. And honestly, I guess it's just a function that most of these slicers have in case you want to do an infill when you're doing your hollowing. And this is, I guess, a really easy way of doing your internal support structure. Like I said, saves you time. You don't have to go inside the model and mess with any supporting. And I have actually workflows for that too that we're going to cover over in some more videos in the future, where I will actually show you guys a trick to your 3D hollowing workflows and a faster and more efficient way of getting some of your 3D support work done inside the model versus you having to do it yourself. And yes, it has to do with auto supporting, but I won't tell you more than that until we actually do that episode, and I am already working on that content. So again, just like everything else, you want to take a look at your layers, and you want to go, scroll up layer by layer and make sure that you're getting the build that works the best for your particular object. You want to make sure your holes are penetrating, you want to make sure your supports are making good contact, and you want to make sure your islands are readily supported. Now, in the instance of you have any sort of issues, or there's a hole that didn't get formed properly, again, this could be a fault of the weird 2D hollowing process. I have had glitchy things happen where a hole did not get made, and Lychee did not say, oh, this is a bad hole. So again, I don't know if that has to do with the way the 2D slicing engine works versus the 3D hollowing system that actually goes in and kind of hollows the model out and actually changes the mesh on the interior. I don't know. The difference between the two is actually fundamentally really vast, because the sense is that the 3D hollowing literally three-dimensionally hollows out the object. It cores it out. Whereas the 2D hollowing does the hollowing on the slice. So you have a difference in the way that it's calculated because of the fact that it's being done on the slice. This may have a lot of reasons to do with why it doesn't work as well as it should, and why it does technically have some glitches that do happen from time to time. Like I said, missing supports or holes that didn't go where they're supposed to go. Or, as I pointed out in the beginning, how my drain holes were not penetrating, even though all of them should have, based on the thickness that we specified when we created the 2D hollowing. And even changing the parameters that we changed should not have adjusted the wall thickness. But again, this is just the way that this particular hollowing system works, because it works on the slice, meaning it works as the slice is rendered. It looks at that slice and it hollows it. I believe it's supposed to do it within pixel density. And again, I don't know how close that tries to get to 100% accuracy. But it does, like I said, it does seem like the walls wind up a little thicker. So you do have to watch your penetration. And, you're going to just have to be careful about putting holes in the right place and making sure that your supports on the outside are placed well enough that they keep the print going. Anyway, that is all for this 2D hollowing support lesson. I hope that this was somewhat educational. I hope I showed you guys a few things about 2D hollowing that you didn't know already. I'll let y'all watch the slicing here. Enjoy some tunes as we call this one out. Anyway, if you guys have any more suggestions for episodes, feel free to leave them in the comments. We do love to hear that you have things that you want to learn. And of course, that is what we're here for. In case anyone's wondering, yes, we did move our shop away from Etsy, as we have been banned due to various reasons. We got singled out for something. Anyway, not a big deal. We have moved our store. We're over on Shopify. You can check us out on our main domain, of course, as always, printmymini.com or printmymini.store. And our inventory is always growing. We just added some new stuff, and we added gas minis. As you guys saw, we posted a couple videos and shorts showing off some gas stuff. So we are adding artists all the time, and we're expecting more stuff every single month. So as I said, enjoy, watch the slice, well, what's left of it anyway, and we'll see you all real soon.
Saturday, Saturday, Saturday.